The Alien movie contains mysteries that we explore in the videos. What the mysteries are and why they are in the movie is due to the background and production of the Alien movie. The movie's script changed several times before the movie was produced and during production. In addition, scenes were added and changed to the movie during production. Not all of these changes are noted in the scripts. This video explores one of the most significant changes to the original Alien story and the film itself, the concept of the egg silo. In fact, the egg silo didn't just influence the first Alien movie. It ultimately shaped the entire Alien franchise, affecting how the creature itself and the larger Alien universe have evolved. This might sound unusual or even dramatic, especially if you're unfamiliar with the background of the egg silo. So let's break it all down. When watching the film, viewers may wonder why there are so many eggs inside the derelict ship and how they got there. Some might even conclude that the eggs aren't actually in the derelict itself, but rather below it. Above all, audiences are left asking, what exactly are these eggs, and how did they end up in the place we see on screen? We also hear Kane describe the egg chamber as a cave, which only deepens the mystery.
A cave. A cave of some sort, but
On top of that, there are lingering questions about the fate of the space jockey and the origin of the mysterious distress signal that drew the Nostromo's crew to the derelict in the first place. When you add in Ridley Scott's later prequels, Prometheus and Alien Covenant, it becomes even more difficult to reconcile all these events, characters, and backgrounds into a single, consistent narrative. To begin with, we need to examine what the original story was like and how it ultimately materialized in Ridley Scott's 1979 film. In the earliest version, Dan O'Bannon's 1976 script, the crew investigates the source of a mysterious signal on a planetoid. There, they discover a derelict ship from which the signal originates. On board, the crew first comes across an empty egg. They then find a dead alien pilot in a chair who, before dying, had carved an angular symbol. In addition, the crew locates the radio transmitter responsible for sending the signal. After returning to their own ship, the crew analyzes their discoveries using the onboard computer. Eventually, they identify a pyramid-like structure on the planetoid, something that directly connects back to the angular symbol drawn by the alien pilot. The crew sets out to investigate the pyramid, which can only be entered from the top. One of the crew members descends through a narrow shaft into the structure where he discovers mysterious eggs, identical to those previously found aboard the derelict ship. Inside the pyramid, he also finds hieroglyphs and murals related to the alien. Eventually, a parasite hatches from one of the eggs and attacks him. Later, the crew examines and interprets the hieroglyphs and murals, which provide clues that help them piece together the background of what is happening. In the story, the pyramid functioned as a temple and sacrificial site for an extinct civilization of ancient beings. The eggs and the aliens themselves were tied directly to the rituals and practices of these creatures. When the original 1976 screenplay began to be reworked for the film in 1977 and 1978, the story went through several major changes. In 1977, the pyramid concept was developed further. Chris Foss created multiple illustrations showing the pyramid, its opening at the top, the crew peering down inside, and one of the members descending into it. Ron Cobb also produced artwork depicting a crew member studying hieroglyphs and murals inside the pyramid. In the end, Walter Hill and David Giler abandoned the pyramid idea. Across different drafts of the script, the location of the eggs and the derelict ship shifted, often altering the backstory as well. In early versions, the space jockey was described as being discovered in a bunker, the remains of some kind of futuristic war. As the screenplay developed, David Giler and Walter Hill introduced a storyline where the eggs were part of a genetic engineering experiment initiated by the same company that ordered the Nostromo crew to investigate the planetoid. This was conceived as an illegal project designed to test how the Nostromo's crew would fare against the alien, and to measure the creature's effectiveness as a killing machine. In one earlier draft, Giler and Hill expanded this evil corporation concept further. The derelict ship was reimagined as a human-built vessel known as the Black Ship, or L-52, The space jockey was no longer an alien pilot, but a dead human astronaut. The egg silo was envisioned as a massive cylinder, and the eggs, still part of the genetic experiment, were stored inside it under the designation Government Model 503. Although this specific version of the evil corporation idea was eventually discarded, the theme itself endured in later drafts of the screenplay. Initially, it was represented by the Nostromo's computer, Mother, before it was transferred to the android Ash, who was added to the story. From that point onward, the corporate conspiracy theme persisted, developed, and grew throughout the Alien franchise, appearing in later films, novels, and other media. It is also worth noting that Dan O'Bannon's original story contained no evil corporation at all. Back in 1975 to 1976, H.R. Giger had been working on early visual concepts for Alejandro Jodorowsky's unmade Dune film. During that period, Dan O'Bannon became fascinated with Giger's art, especially his painting Necronom 4, which strongly caught his attention. In 1977, through O'Bannon's influence, Giger was commissioned to create concept sketches for what would become Alien. These early designs focused on the alien eggs and the facehugger creature. By early 1978, after Ridley Scott was hired as the film's director, he saw Giger's work and insisted on bringing him fully into the Alien production. H.R. Giger designed a vast amount of material related to the alien creature and its world, and his influence on the entire Alien universe is fundamental. Starting in early 1978, Giger was officially hired onto the project. Before the pyramid concept was abandoned, he even produced sketches exploring that idea, which eventually evolved into the egg silo. Like the original pyramid, the egg silo was envisioned as a separate structure. For its design, Giger drew inspiration from an earlier piece he had created for Jodorowsky's Dune, the Harkonnen Castle. Working together with Ridley Scott, the egg silo began to take shape, and Scott developed detailed storyboards for how the sequence would unfold. Beyond its bulbous, onion-like exterior, Giger also designed the interior of the silo. Although visually very different from the pyramid, the scene itself would have followed much the same narrative structure as the original 1906 script. In this way, the basic function of the egg silo mirrored that of the pyramid. Ridley Scott's storyboards show the crew spotting the strange, dome-shaped structure and climbing up its side. At the top, they discover an entrance with a thin, veil-like membrane covering a shaft below. Kane cuts through the covering with a knife and descends into the vast chamber. As he lowers himself, the light from his spacesuit illuminates the interior of the silo. On a ledge, Kane discovers hieroglyphs and a mural. From there, he continues downward until he comes across the alien eggs, where the facehugger leaps at him and the story proceeds as in the final film. In the storyboards, the light emitted from Kane's spacesuit acted as the trigger that awakened the eggs. In the finished film, this function was instead represented by the eerie blue light filtering over them. At this stage of development, the script unfolded with the Nostromo crew following the signal to the derelict ship, where they discovered an empty alien egg, the space jockey in its chair, and the radio transmitter. Dallas shuts down the transmitter, and as the crew makes their way back, they come across the egg silo and decide to investigate it. Unlike in Dan O'Bannon's original version, the crew does not return to their own ship in between. Instead, they move directly from the derelict to the egg silo. This was essentially the version of the Alien story intended to be filmed before production began in earnest, but ultimately, budget limitations forced significant changes. As filming drew closer in the spring of 1978, the story had to undergo major changes due to budget constraints. Since the film did not initially have a large enough budget, several planned locations on the planetoid were removed from the script. Among the cut locations were the egg silo and the derelict ship. The scene in which Kane discovers the alien eggs was central to the film. For that reason, the egg chamber environment and its sets were built following H.R. Giger's designs. In the original version of the story, a mural was also intended to be discovered within the egg chamber. Since it was not possible to build a separate egg silo set, the egg chamber was initially written in the script as being located inside a cavern beneath the planet's surface. In one version of the screenplay, there were even references suggesting that the cavern had been constructed by humans, though this idea was dropped in later drafts. The budget also did not allow for the construction of the derelict ship's sets. As a result, in the story, the crew instead discovered the alien pilot encased within a rock formation. During production, this figure began to be referred to as the space jockey. Filming therefore began with the arrangement in which the space jockey was found inside the rock formation, while the egg chamber was situated underground. During filming, Ridley Scott managed to convince the studio to increase the budget. The decision was influenced by the film's early promise, Scott's strong creative vision, and the detailed storyboards he produced. With the expanded budget came significant changes to both the script and production. The additional funding allowed the construction of the derelict ship's exterior set. For the interior, the existing egg chamber set was repurposed to serve as the space jockey chamber by adding the massive pilot's chair. The extra funds also made it possible to build the derelict's interior corridors. As a result, the discovery of the space jockey was changed back from being found in a rock formation to being discovered aboard the derelict ship. Scott had originally wanted to film a separate egg silo sequence, but the budget still could not accommodate the construction of its exterior. Ultimately, he was forced to merge the egg silo and the derelict into a single setting. Scott also relocated the mural from the egg chamber to the derelict's corridor. Giger painted the mural and test footage was shot, but Scott ultimately decided to cut the scene entirely. The egg chamber was initially supposed to contain only 6 eggs. For greater visual impact, however, many more were added, creating the impression that hundreds were present. Following the original story, scenes were shot where the Nostromo's crew discovers an empty egg as well as the radio transmitter inside the space jockey's chamber. Another sequence showed Dallas shutting down the transmitter. In the end, these scenes were removed from the final cut of the film. Through the many changes made during production, the entire setup diverged significantly from the original story, leaving behind a fragmented and puzzling result. The first major question concerns the location of the egg chamber. In the film, is it situated inside the derelict spacecraft or beneath it? Among fans, this has been a long debated point. Several factors add to the confusion. For example, in both the film and the script, Kane describes the egg chamber as a cave. Moreover, in the matte painting used in the film, the chamber appears as an expansive cavern stretching far into the distance. Kane's line of dialogue, in which he speculates about what he sees while descending into the egg chamber, was originally written for an earlier version of the script, back when the chamber was conceived as a subterranean cave. That line remained in the screenplay all the way through to the final version, despite the story's later revisions. According to the later versions of the screenplay, the egg chamber is located inside the derelict ship, specifically in the cargo hold. This addition appeared in the final drafts during filming. The unified visual design of the space jockey chamber and the egg chamber, both shot on the same set, further supports this interpretation, suggesting that the egg chamber is indeed part of the derelict ship. Additionally, when Ridley Scott managed to increase the budget during production, he changed the storyboards so that the location where the eggs were discovered was moved to the derelict ship. In addition to fan theories, several members of the film's production team have shared their own interpretations. H.R. Geiger, in various interviews, suggested that the derelict ship had landed on top of an Earth-based egg silo, and that the aliens penetrated the derelict from below through the floor. Ridley Scott, on the other hand, considered the egg chamber to be part of the derelict ship itself, which is why he moved the mural discovery into the ship's corridor. The confusion is compounded by deleted scenes, such as the discovery of the empty alien egg and the radio transmitter in the space jockey chamber, as well as the scene showing the crew shutting off the transmitter. The greatest source of confusion when trying to piece together the story comes from the large number of alien eggs in the egg chamber. If only 6 eggs had been present as originally intended, the number of eggs would likely have matched the number of other space jockeys on the derelict ship. This would have allowed for a coherent narrative. The space jockeys would have brought an alien egg from somewhere outside the ship, from which a facehugger would have leapt onto one of the space jockeys. The remaining 6 space jockeys would have suffered the same fate as the Nostromo crew. The chestburster would emerge and grow into a full-sized alien, killing the others and using their bodies as raw material to produce new eggs. This process would have resulted in 6 eggs, matching the number of space jockeys. Before the alien could finish off all the space jockeys, they would have triggered the warning signal. However, the presence of hundreds of eggs in the egg chamber completely disrupts this narrative logic. When the separate egg silo was removed, the opportunity to build and establish a foundation for the planet's events, and particularly for the alien's backstory, was lost. Had the original film included a distinct egg silo, or at least referenced it, there would have been a direct possibility to create a separate alien world with its own culture and structure, as Dan O'Bannon originally envisioned. Additionally, a separate egg silo would have provided a very different foundation for developing the alien's life cycle, one that could have been tied to a more mysterious, perhaps even ancient, background. In its current form, when combining the hundreds of eggs inside the derelict ship, the mural, the original alien life cycle, and James Cameron's later edition of the Alien Queen, the result becomes rather confusing. Some have proposed a version of the story in which the alien queen laid its eggs inside a cavern and the derelict ship later landed on top of it. While that's one possible interpretation, it has no connection to the original concept, since the alien queen character wasn't created until the 1980s. In the current Alien universe, which spans films, books, comics, and more, the alien's backstory is presented inconsistently and somewhat ambiguously. For example, Prometheus and Alien Covenant follow Ridley Scott's interpretation, constructing a parallel narrative for the alien's origins. Also, Alien vs. Predator heavily draws on O'Bannon's original ideas, merging them with the Predator universe. To end the video, here are 2 interesting details related to the topic. In the first Alien movie, production documents reveal the egg chamber sequence was originally filmed with much more footage than what appears in the final cut. For example, in the script, Kane examining the alien eggs in 2 separate locations. In the movie, however, the scene was heavily edited, creating a continuity error. We first see Kane inspecting the eggs in one area, and later, the facehugger jumps at him from a completely different spot. A scene showing Kane being pulled back up from the egg chamber by a cable was also filmed, but ultimately removed from the final cut. The second detail connects to Prometheus film, where Ridley Scott pays tribute to H.R. Giger by featuring a structure reminiscent of the original egg silo design. Share your thoughts in the comments. What does the egg silo and its removal make you think about? Would a separate egg silo scene have improved the film? And how do you think it might have changed the final movie and the entire Alien franchise? And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.